thank you for several epiphanies I had during your talk. The actual question for me is, do you have like numbers for banking or financial, from the financial branches also like showing these results?
This is something that is beyond just high school, beyond students. I've done a lot of work showing that these types of concern matter in a variety of settings. We've done it in developing countries, developed countries, a lot of different settings, a lot of types of decisions. And one in which we get at this idea of self-esteem is when we look at wasteful, flashy consumption. So there's this idea that, again, long-standing idea that we don't buy things just because we like them. We buy things many times because you want to impress other people. Of course, someone might buy a Ferrari because they really, really like the engine and, you know, and the leather trim and so on. But a lot of it is because if people see you driving a Ferrari, they're going to think, oh, the person has a lot of money. So it's called conspicuous consumption. It's buying status goods, right? So we actually ran a large experiment in Indonesia with a bank that has those fancy, you know, in Indonesia it's still considered fancy, platinum cards. Which platinum cards are a cool way to signal that you're rich because you can only be offered a platinum card if your income is verified to be above a certain level. So if you show your card at a dinner, people say, oh, you know, that person has money. It's a kind of a nice, subtle way to signal that you have money. So you're trying to understand to what extent people's demand for platinum cards is driven entirely because of this concern for signaling status. Of course, a platinum card comes with some extra benefits. You have that lounge access. In fact, in Indonesia, you have a discount for helicopter taxis. But, you know, is that why they're demanding it? So we do some experiments showing that even if you offer the same benefits for a normal card or a platinum card, people are willing to pay much more money just to have the actual card, right? And we show that, even holding fixed the benefits. And in fact, things get darker and darker in terms of our view about humanity, because at some point we do an experiment where we create a new card, the diamond card, and the diamond card is the same card as a platinum card, same thing, no extra benefit, no. In fact, it's not even a higher income requirement, but we tell them, you know, we're going to start offering the platinum card to some poorer people, right? So now people look at the platinum card and they might be associating you with poorer people as well. So people start demanding the diamond card and paying more and more because they want to avoid being seen as someone who's not that rich. And we also show that people who get a platinum card start using a platinum card much more often in restaurants, in places where other people can see them using. They start going to restaurants more often, putting the card. In fact, they have a card that gives them cash back at the restaurant. Nope, they use a platinum card and so on. Okay, very depressing. So self-esteem. So we said, okay, how can we curb this desire to, you know, impress others? One potential story is that what if you make people feel better about themselves? Maybe they need less the approval of others, right? So we do some experiments where some people are exposed to some simple interventions of self-affirmation, it's called. Very simple. You make people think about something that made them really proud about themselves, right? So they get a call, someone tells, just, you know, some survey and asks them to think about something that made them really proud about themselves. Sometime later, the bank calls them and offers a platinum card. Those people who made themselves feel better, they don't want the platinum card anymore. They said, I don't need this. So it's kind of a proof of concept that there's something powerful about improving people's self-esteem and make them less susceptible to this desire to impress and fit in. There's very little work on that. So that one is really just scratching the surface. But I think you're absolutely right in intuition. The interaction between how you feel about yourself and how much approval of others you need, I think it's a very important interaction, and more work is needed there.
You said that you split the high schools between low-income families, kind of, and the high-income ones. And based on those findings, you said that you have to be careful with the measurements which you implement. So either it's cool to be smart or it's not cool. Are there any other factors which you have to kind of take care of, like not just the income, but what else might be important?
It's a very, very good question. I mean, I should be careful because, as you're saying, I don't want people to come get out with the message that, oh, the only thing that affects the type of culture is whether it's a low-income or high-income setting. There are a number of things that are different across these two settings. And very quite frankly, we don't have a theory on why you end up with one norm or another. Those are outcomes, equilibrium outcomes that exist. And we showed that both exist, and there are ways of identifying, even with survey questions, whether you seem to be more in this environment or that environment. But understand, the next step, really, as you're saying, is understanding how do you get into one or the other, right? And I think it's a very important question. There's something interesting there and tricky, as I was describing, which is if you start from a culture where kids avoid schooling and you work really hard to curb down that culture, you might end up with the other culture, which is something interesting. It could be that, you know, the same school, you start with a culture where kids don't care about school, and you really do a great job getting them to think that it's important, that it's great, they should study, they should be smart. If you overdo it, you might end up with the other culture. So that's an interesting discussion. But I agree with you. I cannot attribute this to income differences. There are too many things that are different across the two settings. It's more about showing that there exist two different type of cultures, and they exist in this case in these two types of schools. But you know, there could be very, very well low-income settings with the other type of school culture, and vice versa. Yes. Thanks for the clarification.
I'm going to ask you a bit of a crystal ball question, if I might. Reviewing all of the research you've done, do you think that from a behavioral economics point of view, the financial crisis could have been avoided?
I think there's a lot of insights that people can gain from incorporating elements of behavioral economics into understanding the dynamics of financial markets. Absolutely. I'll give you an example from my own research. I don't think it helps explain anything about the financial crisis. I don't have that type of ambition there. But I think it highlights the importance, which is understanding financial hurts, right? So many times people just invest, they get excited, they invest the same way other people invest, right? And this could be driven by purely rational motives. You know, I see Rupert making an investment. He's a smart guy. It's probably a good idea. I'll do the same. It's a very rational thing. If there's some information in his decision. But there's other more emotional, psychological elements. Like, well, Rupert made an investment. What if he makes a lot of money? I don't want to be in that case where everyone around me made an investment and I didn't. So that could be this kind of herd mentality driven by some excitement to keeping up with others and so on, which could explain a lot of people, everyone just buy a house and things of the sort, you know, let's just jump into this opportunity without really thinking about the fundamentals. I'll give you an example. I mean, again, I have no data on this, but I have the strong impression that the whole craze with Bitcoins was a very behavioral element. Think about it. You know, most people who invest in Bitcoin invested very small amounts. The median amount, even the 90th percentile is pretty small, the amount. So my interpretation of the whole thing is the following. It's like, I see a lot of my friends are investing in Bitcoin. I might think it's a stupid idea, but what if it's not? What if the state of the world where all these guys make a lot of money, and I'm the dumb one who said, oh yeah, you thought you were smart, you're like the economist? Look at this. You're like still just a professor. Now we're all rich. You know. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to do it as well. So this FOMO, right, fear of missing out, is something that could explain a lot of behavior in financial markets, and it's a very behavioral story. You know. So that's just there's a restaurant in Brazil where they had 27 waiters, and all of them split, except one, split this lottery ticket. The guy's like, yeah, it's stupid, lottery ticket. I'm going to waste my money. Well, they won. They all quit their jobs, and that guy was the only one who was still a waiter. And these guys made the point of coming to the restaurant and say, serve me, and so on. So, you know, you don't want to be that waiter, basically. So that can explain a lot of hurting in financial markets. So I'm not trying to say that this explains the crisis, but a lot of macro dynamics in financial markets can have very behavioral elements playing a role. So important to think about experiments also in financial environments to understand those dynamics.
I was thinking about social stigma. And I was thinking of charter schools, and I'm not sure I know everything about the charter schools, but as far as I know, it's a low income, like people with, you know, from low income families go to these schools. And I was wondering if you think that this goes into the right direction of removing the social stigma around, you know, showing effort and doing exactly that, like changing these social norms, and if that could be a scalable solution, because obviously, what does it do to the other schools?
It's a great question. I think charter schools are a big bundle of a lot of things, so it's hard to identify specifically what's happening there. But there's definitely a concern about instilling a different culture and really trying to emphasize the importance of education. And there are even those like no excuses charter schools and so on. So I think it's definitely part of the package there. And I've talked to people who are really experts on charter schools and trying to gauge from them whether they think that part of the reason why they work is by shaping cultures and changing these effects, and they have the strong impression that it is the case, right? But there's not a lot of work really identifying the specific aspect of charter schools. So it would be interesting to look at that. I agree, but I think it could be part of a solution in some areas. Yeah.
My question is, are your policies not sometimes just like, do they just treat the symptoms, and shouldn't it be a better solution to treat the peer pressure? We here in Austria, we are discussing about our school system. Is it better to like focus all the good students in one class and the bad ones in another? Wouldn't that be another possibility to like mix them up? And the related question, have you also examined schools where there was more diversity, not only like high-income people, low-income people, good grades, low grades? If they're the worst group, is then the peer pressure less?
Very good question as well. So yes, you're right. A lot of these questions are about these policy solutions are about attacking the symptoms and not necessarily the cause. I agree with you. I mean, those are all very common policies. So basically, it's like, let's look at policies that people do and just see how they would change depending on the culture. That was kind of the exercise. But absolutely, you're right. Maybe a deeper question is like, how can you really make sure these cultures don't even emerge? And that's a harder question, and which involves also understanding how and why they emerge, which is something we still need more work on. I agree with you. Now, we have a little bit of discussion related to what you're saying on tracking, right? Should we pull kids of different abilities together or separate them? And I think it's a very important discussion in light of our findings that, perhaps tracking could be something good in a way. Again, there's no evidence, so it's just speculation, but, it could be that, if you have kids with lower ability sitting next with high ability kids, they might be really afraid of expressing and exposing themselves because they know that there's a big gap in ability, in academic ability. So there's, in a culture of excellence, a culture of achievement, you might want to separate. And likewise in the other type of culture as well, right? Some kids, as we saw, non-honors and honors, kids, when you put them in around more academically oriented kids, you kind of undo this, these negative effects. In fact, you actually start creating positive effects. Perhaps we can discuss whether we want it or not, but tracking is definitely a very important question, and understanding, and we don't see a lot of this discussion of peer pressure and these peer effects in the debate about tracking, and it's something that I think we should consider. Of course, there are other trade-offs associated with tracking, but I think this one is something important. But I agree, there's more work is needed to understand how these cultures emerge, and once you get there, you might want to think about policy on how to prevent the emergence of these cultures. Now, we have simple policy discussion on, given the existence of these cultures and a menu of available policy, how can we tailor them given these cultures? And that's how far we're going right now, but we should definitely go further in the future.